But let's start with an item that's likely to get you and our guests here talking: transgender rights. Later today, the Church of England's ruling body, the General Synod, will discuss introducing a special religious ceremony to welcome in the new identity of those who are transgender. The move comes as transgender rights have become increasingly high profile, with some schools introducing gender-neutral uniforms and policies. And in a world first, a Canadian parent is currently battling to have gender unspecified written on their new baby's birth certificate. So, is there enough understanding of transgender issues? Joining us now are Juno Dawson, an author and journalist. Mike Davidson is the CEO of Core Issues Trust. Radhika Sangani is a journalist, and Dr. Joanna Williams is an academic and author. Welcome to all of you. Juno, the church is steeped in tradition, and change, it does come slowly, doesn't it? Are we asking too much for the church to change like this?
I don't think so. I think you've got to remember, being trans and having faith, they're not mutually exclusive. And, you know, if you are a religious person, there shouldn't be anywhere more welcoming than your place of worship, whether it's a mosque or a synagogue or a church. And I think, I'm not especially religious, but I think if I were Christian, I really hope there would still be a home for me in the church, and I think that's important.
Mike, are you pleased that the church is trying to find ways of accepting transgender people?
I think everybody needs to be welcome in the Church of Christ. But I worry because yesterday, Synod passed a motion where it banned conversion therapy. So in other words, people who want to go the other way, who don't want to be gay, they're not allowed to be recognised. They can't have help. So what I would call for is a real understanding before we make such a momentous change as is about to happen.
So if there is a momentous change, I mean, of course, the General Synod are just discussing this at the moment, but if they do change, would you be happy with that?
I would be concerned that what we are doing is we are encouraging people to align their belief system and their body. In other words, they will encourage their body to follow what they believe in their mind. Christians are about renewing their mind and following the mind of Christ very often. And I think what that means is very often we have a belief system, and if our bodies are going in the other direction, then what we are encouraged to do is to ensure that we make our bodies obedient to the mind of Christ. That's a very different approach.
Lots of movement over here. I don't know whether you're shaking your head or nodding at China.
What is most interesting here is what this tells us about the importance of individual feelings, and it seems that individual feelings nowadays can override biology and can also now, it seems, override the will of God as well. And I'm not an especially religious person, but I think if you are religious, then a belief in God would be fundamental to how you would perceive of your own identity. And it seems now we're saying to people, well, however you feel, if you don't feel like a man, if you don't feel like a woman, God will recognise that. Religion's irrelevant, biology's irrelevant, you be whoever you want to be.
Much of the debate goes around children and children's identity. What do you feel about that, where you're giving the child the option to choose?
I think that's very problematic. I think it can really cause psychological issues with a child to say to children as young as 3, 4, 5 years old, how do you feel about your gender? Do you feel like a boy or do you feel like a girl? And I think that can confuse children.
Sorry.
Radhika, it's problematic?
Yeah, no, I completely disagree there. I think that, you know, ultimately that's sort of just suggesting that being trans is something people choose, it's a trend, and, like, we know that's just not true.
Can I just check, are any of the rest of us transgender?
I'm not.
It's just me there. So as the person who has any lived experience of this, I will say that I was 3 or 4 years old when I strongly felt people were telling me I was a boy, and I was like, you're crazy. That's not the way it is at all. And that wasn't coming... This was the 80s, so there was no pressure from teachers or schools or my parents. I knew 100% with every inch of my being that not only did I want to be a girl, but that had all been well, I was. And
Mike, we're talking about children. So Juno was 3. There are other children, 3, 4, 5. These cases, what's your view? I mean, you're sort of smirking a bit then when she was saying that.
Well, I want to respect your experience.
Well, because
absolutely.
You've not had that experience.
Well,
so.
Actually, I would disagree with that, because as a young man, I felt that I had attractions to the same sex. But there was something in my mind that told me I was not comfortable with this. And I didn't buy into this notion that it was just systemic homophobia, that the country tells you this is wrong and therefore you go along with it.
So why were you having the feelings then?
Because
they weren't natural?
Because they were my own values that made me feel that I wanted to get married, have children, and I wanted to live as a heterosexual man. Now, I know people have different opinions, but the point here is, the possibility is, trans will be recognised fully in the church and they will be encouraged. But people who want to go in the direction I went in are being stopped from doing that. And the reason is because it is claimed that orientation is in all cases unchangeable.
What do you mean people like you are being stopped?
My clients, I work with individuals who, for whatever reason, want to come out of homosexual practices.
So they have homosexual feelings, and what do you do? I
work with them to support their goals. Just as Josie has a goal here, we have a goal.
What goals?
A goal to leave homosexual practices and live in a different way.
So, Juno, is Mike not being true to himself and the people he says his clients?
I mean, I'm sorry, I wasn't warned that there was going to be a gay conversion therapist on this show because I wouldn't have agreed to have come on. I'm quite ambushed, actually. But it's a disgraceful practice. I've seen the results.
We're not conversionists.
OK. Well, I mean, we don't want to get too much into that debate because that isn't the issue here.
No, I know.
But is Mike being true to himself?
I mean, that's for Mike to decide, and I think... you know, I've not lived Mike's experience, and this is why it's very difficult. You know, very often I get sort of wheeled out as the dilatrans person to kind of give my lived experience. I just think, you know, last week we had the Stonewall Schools report, which was published. I'm a Stonewall Schools role model that says that 8 out of 10 young transgender people hasn't just thought about trying to kill themselves; they've tried to kill themselves. And so, for my mind, while undoubtedly we've had a huge rise in the visibility of trans people, the fact I'm sat here on a Sunday morning is a wonderful thing, and there will be people at home watching this. Hello. But, you know, I think with that increase in visibility, we've not necessarily had a rise in understanding. And I think just yesterday on the front page of The Sun, we had Man Gives Birth, and the week before that we had Wombs for Men. And so there's still the tone of the conversation around transgender people. We've got to move it on. It's not a freak show. It's not a circus.
Is the tone wrong? And we're getting children are incredibly unhappy. I mean, we're attempting to take their lives.
I think this is very relativistic. We're throwing everything up in the air and we say you can be whoever you want to be, and we kind of privilege this idea of being true to yourself above biological reality. The fact is, men do not get pregnant. If you have the biological components necessary to get pregnant and give birth, then you are biologically female, you are a woman. And I think we send out very confusing messages to young children who might just be going through
children or adults?
Well, to both children and adults, but especially, I think, for children. I think adults fine, you know, do what you want, be what you want, that's your right. But when we start telling children that men can get pregnant, that men can have babies, we are sending very
how do you answer
messages.
when Juno says at 3 years old she knew...
I could equally... I mean, I've got 3 children. I know lots and lots of young children who at 3 years old had all kinds of different ideas about their gender and how they saw their role in the world and their individual identity. And lots of them do grow up and don't carry on thinking and feeling and acting as they did when they were 3 years old. And I think it's really important that we allow children the freedom to grow and develop and recognise that sometimes a phase is just a phase.
I really think that with this issue that there's so much scaremongering here. And I think... people sort of hear the thought of, oh, no, you know, small child, nursery, hearing about trans, oh, God, you know, what's it going to do? And I just think, you know, this completely disregards the fact that there are medical experts out there. People, if a child, you know, feels like they're trans and they're going to go down that path, they're a medical expert. I would just step along the way.
Okay.
They were there.
I would just doubt that a 3-year-old would wake up one day and say, I feel like I'm trans.
So, Juno, you mentioned those headlines and you criticised them. Let's turn it on its head and say transgender activists, some people would say, are actually preventing education. It's sort of this transgender police. People are scared to say things because they might get it wrong.
This is the powerful trans lobby. That's one of my favourite myths about the trans community, that we have all this power in society when, of course, you know, just coming here on the tube, there was a couple giggling at me, and there is no power. But, I mean, just coming back to what was said over there about trans children, because I think if we could... the greatest myth, and I think possibly one of the most damaging myths, is that these 3- and 4-year-olds are being wheeled into surgery. It just doesn't happen. I used to be a primary school teacher. There was a young person in the class above me, so a 6- and 7-year-old. And this was a family in crisis. This was a child who had been born biologically male, and their family was really, really struggling. So eventually they were referred to the Tavistock in London, which is the gender clinic. And nothing happened to that child in terms of medical intervention, but the family received some much, much needed support. And as it happens, that child, yes, did go on to make steps towards a medical transition later on. But yes, some don't. So as children, it's much more about having that conversation, about supporting them, supporting their family. And that isn't medically, it's more about their well-being.
Let's bring in Samantha. What have you got for us, Samantha?
Well, we've got some strong comments from Lee. He says that transgender issues are in our face constantly, so I think it's gone beyond understanding and people are sick of it now. But Steve says the essence of being Christian is compassion towards fellow human beings, acceptance, empathy and understanding. So why do trans people feel they need special treatment? Gemma says the church is doing a good thing here, trying to understand the world around them. Anything that can help acceptance and spread love can only do good. And we finally heard from Sarah, who says, I think more should be done to educate children at school about trans issues so they can understand and learn about humanism.
Yeah, Samantha, the first comment you had there, I'm going to put that to Radhika. It's shoved in our face. It's too much. What do you make of that?
Like, it couldn't be further from the truth. You know, of course, we are hearing more about trans issues now, which is amazing and that's great, but I don't think that means we've reached that level of understanding at all. Like, the Stonewall report that was just mentioned, I mean, that just shows everything, doesn't it? Like, teenagers are still being bullied, they're still, you know, they're self-harming, they're trying to kill themselves. It's horrific. There's not this level of understanding.
But in the case of Bethany, in this case, in this country, we know that parents are not free to be involved in working through the issues with their children. Social services are stepping in, removing children from families. There is
is society too quick to act to help people to change?
I think that we're getting there. We're slowly getting to... No, I don't think so at all. No. And I don't think anybody, really, who's gone through this process themselves, like, as Juno said, you know, I don't think they say that at all.
Jana?
I think, you know, my heart goes out to the child that you were describing, but what we have in schools at the moment is way beyond supporting individuals. I mean, if you have a look at, say, gender-neutral school uniforms, for example, I've got no problem with children wearing whatever they want. I think God should be able to wear trousers, you know, whatever people want to wear to school, they should. But when you present it in the school setting as this is a special gender-neutral uniform because people can be gender non-binary, I think that's way beyond supporting individuals and way beyond just saying, hey, kids, wear what you like. It's about opening up this idea that gender is something you can choose.
OK, I'm going to give the final word to Juno. What do you make of that?
I think, I mean, it's... Like I say, I worked in schools for a long time, and I started to see those kind of things filtering through when I was still on the coalface, as it were. And I think it's more about schools just being prepared. I mean, now I'm an author and I travel around schools with my teen fiction all the time, and it's unheard of now that there wouldn't be one trans or non-binary teenager in every school that I go into, and it's really lovely. Usually the librarian comes and introduces them to me, like, so pleased to meet you, you're my role model. And it's so lovely, but because that wouldn't have been the way. And what I think some of this conversation is reminiscent of is I was at school in the 80s and 90s, and obviously I was educated under Thatcher's Section 28. And that was very much stemmed from this same thing of, won't someone think of the children? Think of the children. And that's what it's reminiscent of. You know, the LGB community had made leaps forward post-1967, and so then, right, well, what can we think we'll worry about? You know, we've got to fret about the children, and they introduced that measure. And it feels like 20 years on, that's slightly where we are now with trans awareness in schools, which is there's this slight hysteria, this won't someone think of the children, and actually the children are fine.
OK, not a lot of agreement, but a really interesting debate. Thank you all on the panel.
Thank you.